In the opinion of the Chair,
216, offered by Mr. Clyde of Georgia.
pursuant to House Resolution 723, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde, and member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My amendment to the FY24 Defense Appropriations Bill would simply prohibit the Department of Defense from using funds to administer, implement, or enforce the proposed action by the Department of Army regarding the removal of the Reconciliation Monument at Arlington National Cemetery. Following 4 brutal years of the American Civil War, our nation's great leaders, President Abraham Lincoln and future President Union General Ulysses S. Grant, took great measures to ensure that our nation reconciled and unified after the conflict that turned fellow countrymen against fellow countrymen. These unifying actions include pardons for Confederate leaders that waged war, as well as the restoration of confiscated property. What these great American leaders understood is that a nation divided against itself cannot stand. Then in 1898, following the Mexican-American War, when Union and Confederate veterans fought side by side under one flag, the American flag, President McKinley declared in the heart of the South, in Atlanta, Georgia, the capital of my home state, that the U.S. government would commit to sharing the burden of honoring and properly burying the Confederate dead, stating, sectional feelings, I quote, sectional feelings no longer holds back the love we feel for each other. The old flag waves over us in peace with new glories. In 1900, Congress authorized Confederate remains to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery. And in 1906, President McKinley allowed for the construction of a new monument honoring our country's new shared reconciliation from its troubled divisions. In 1914, President Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, unveiled this new memorial to national unity, which was designed by a Jewish American sculptor. The memorial is topped with a woman crowned by an olive wreath to symbolize peace. Beginning with the unveiling of the statue and now every year since, it is the tradition of the President of the United States to send a wreath to the memorial honoring the dead buried in a circle around the monument. This tradition, which shows tremendous national unity, has been carried on regardless of party or politics of the sitting president. In fact, even President Obama understood the Reconciliation Monument in the context for which it stood, which was unity, not division, when he continued on the presidential tradition of sending a wreath to the monument. Despite the bipartisan support for this monument, the Renaming Commission, established by the fiscal year 2021 National Defense Authorization Act, overstepped its legislative authority and recommended that the Department of Army remove the memorial from Arlington National Cemetery. The Renaming Commission's authority given to them by Congress empowers them to recommend the removal of, quote, all names, symbols, displays, monuments, and paraphernalia that honor or commemorate the Confederate States of America. Yet, as described previously, the Reconciliation Monument does not honor nor commemorate the Confederacy. It commemorates reconciliation and national unity. Furthermore, the Renaming Commission's authority explicitly prohibits the desecration of grave sites. There are hundreds of gravestones encircling the monument, and I do not know how in the world these graves will remain untouched if the Department of the Army proceeds with its proposal to remove the monument. Former Virginia Democrat Senator Jim Webb, a decorated Marine Corps officer who served multiple combat tours in Vietnam and later became the Secretary of the Navy, recently published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal concerning the Reconciliation Monument at Arlington Cemetery. In his opinion, Senator Webb describes his own journey of reconciliation following his combat tours in Vietnam. He explains how he hosted a delegation of Vietnamese officials in Washington to encourage them to be peaceful toward former South Vietnamese veterans who were labeled as traitors after the war and had been treated as such. Senator Webb describes how, to make his point to the delegation, he brought them to the Reconciliation Monument in Arlington and pointed across the Potomac toward the Lincoln Memorial to show that old wounds can be healed. Senator Webb concludes with this quote, "If the monument is taken apart and removed, it would send a different message, one of a deteriorating society willing to erase the generosity of its past in favor of bitterness and misunderstanding." I ask my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to take a stand against such a divisive and history-erasing action and support my amendment to defund the effort to remove the Reconciliation Monument from the Arlington National Cemetery. My amendment prevents this tyrannical encroachment by legislative authority, ignorance of congressional intent, in disregard of national unity. Thank you, and I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
I rise in opposition to this amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
In 2021, Congress passed the NDAA, creating a naming commission with the intent of renaming military installations, relocating memorials that celebrate the Confederate attempt to rip apart the United States at the stake of maintaining slavery. The NDAA was passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. In fact, the NDAA had so much bipartisan support that it defeated President Trump's veto by a vote of 322 to 87. With a few remaining Confederate monuments and minor installations that have not already been renamed or removed will happen soon. As required by Congress and implemented by the Secretary of Defense, Arlington National Cemetery is required to remove a Confederate memorial and has initiated the process for careful removal and relocation of the memorial located in Section 16 of the cemetery. Therefore, this amendment not only attempts to defy the overwhelming bipartisan support will of Congress, but it is likely too late to even make a difference. Congress decided in a unified fashion that it was time to move on from a regretful era of civil war and human rights atrocities. This amendment will do nothing to stop that. I encourage my colleagues to vote no on this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you. It would be an absolute disgrace if this reconciliation monument to our nation's national unity is removed from Arlington National Cemetery and the graves that encircle it are desecrated. With that, I urge all of my colleagues to support my amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized.
I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. All those in favor say aye. All opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.